Flora, is it Flygt?
Flygt, yes.
Flygt. She's from American Transmission Company. She's a strategic planning and policy advisor. And for those of you who don't know, ATC owns the majority of the grid in Wisconsin, the whole high voltage system in Wisconsin, except for the western part of the state where NSPW owns the transmission system.
Good afternoon. I want to talk a little bit about what American Transmission Company's role is in the Clean Power Plan. As one of the earlier speakers mentioned, we own most of the high voltage lines here in the state of Wisconsin in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and a little tiny bit in Minnesota and Illinois. I want to introduce ATC just for a minute or two here. We are the first multi-state transmission-only utility that was established in the U.S. We have about close to 10,000 miles of line, 530 substations. We have a very diverse ownership base. We are owned by all of the folks in Wisconsin who divested their transmission to ATC back in 2000, 2001 when we were formed. And that includes the IOUs in the state. It includes Wisconsin Public Power Incorporated, and it also includes about 24 or 23 other members who are munis and co-ops. So we do have a very, very diverse ownership base. We have an obligation as a public utility. Our obligation is to provide reliable transmission. But we also have an objective. Our objective is we want to provide that reliable transmission while also providing economic savings to our customers and ultimately their customers, and also to make sure that we are prepared for a future that could look very different from today. Since 2001, we've upgraded 1,800 miles of transmission line, improved about 165 substations, and built 43 new transmission lines. I'm not going to go through all of this. I do just want to touch on some of the things that we've done, and we just heard about the 3 MultiValue projects that are here in Wisconsin, and those were really put together through a great effort, a combined effort from state governors, state public service commissions, the Mid-Continent ISO, and the transmission owners, all working together to figure out what is the most cost-effective way to meet the renewable portfolio standards. And ATC was a very integral part of that discussion. And we do have those 3 MultiValue projects and what that means is that they're not just about reliability, but they provide economic savings, which means that they allow MISO, they allow our customers to source their energy from more cost-effective power plants at more hours of the day. So there's a cost savings there. JT referred, it's congestion savings. When you can reduce those congestion costs, you create savings for the customers. You also reduce your losses. You also source one of the critical elements for ATC with these multi-value projects is that there's a balance between sourcing your renewables in-state, where you have to build less transmission, but actually more, in the case of wind, you have to build more wind towers, and you have to compare that cost to the cost of building fewer wind towers out west in Minnesota, Iowa, the Dakotas, where the wind regime is much better. But then you have to add in the transmission. And when we looked at that combination, what we found was there's a balance there. And you should source some of it where the wind regime is better and some of it more locally. The other thing I want to focus on here on this slide is reducing energy losses. One of the things that happens with transmission lines is that when you put a lot of power through them, they get hot and they lose heat, and that means that you need to produce more megawatt hours at the source than you actually receive at the end of the line for the end-use customers. When you build a bigger transmission line, when you build a more efficient system, you can reduce those losses. We estimate that with all of the transmission lines that we've improved and put into service since 2001, we will save about 15 million megawatt hours of electricity. But important for this discussion, will eliminate 10 million tons of CO2 emissions. Now that's over the entire lifetime of those transmission lines, which is about 40 years. That's what we estimate the book life. Actually, they last much longer. Every CEO that I've dealt with at ATC always has a piece of conductor in his office that they took down recently, and it's 100 years old. So they make it into a little art object and put it in their office. So there is just a lot, they're long-lived assets. And also then the last thing, averting the need for a 124 megawatt generating plant. And again, that's a cost savings for the customers ultimately. Okay, so what about the Clean Power Plan? I'm going to focus on the changes in the plan that are most of interest to American Transmission Company. First of all, there were, 4.1 million comments, and I don't know exactly how many million comments were about reliability, but I suspect it was a lot. And the fact is that we have that obligation, we need to keep the lights on. So we were very glad to see that the implementation date moved from 2020 to 2022. That's going to be helpful. Also going to be helpful is the interim periods starting in 2022 to 2024 and a much smoother glide path. One of the things that I'm sure you all know about the proposed rule is that it was really a cliff at 2020 of where you had to be in just 5 short years. They had additional provisions to address reliability. One is that the states have to show that they've taken reliability into account as they develop their plans. And I know that the states are really counting on MISO, the Mid-Continent ISO, to help them figure out what are the best, most cost-effective ways to do that. And then they'll be working with their utilities and transmission owners to figure out, okay, how do we meet the reliability needs? The states can amend their plans if they find out that they have a reliability issue. So if one of the things that they thought they were going to include in their plan doesn't quite work or causes, issues on the electric grid, then they can change that and plan to meet it. They still have to meet the goals, but meet it in a different way. There is a reliability safety valve. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And there's also a memorandum of understanding between the EPA, FERC, and DOE to assure reliability. So they are much more focused on this in the final rule than we saw that they were in the proposed rule, and we appreciate that. So, transmission and reliability. So the EPA has provided additional time, and they believe that it will be enough. One of the things that I want to talk about here is how long it takes to plan, permit, site, and build a transmission line. Any guesses? Okay. In a sort of perfect path, and I'm going to talk about the MVPs because that's where the political will was there to build those. The analysis followed on, the transmission owners were engaged, and now we're in the process of permitting and building those projects. That took really it's going to be 10 to 15 years before all of those projects are in service. Some are in service already. At ATC, we started looking at some of those issues that were addressed by the MVPs in 2007. They were approved by MISO in 2011. We just recently got the approval for Badger Coulee in 2014, and it'll be in service in 2018. It's a long time. So even though they've delayed the start of the rule to 2022 and provided another glide path, it's still going to be very challenging if there are major needs on the transmission system, and we don't know what those might look like at this point, but if there's major needs, it's going to be very challenging to get those projects planned, permitted, and built. Now, okay, 10 to 15 years. How many years do you think it takes for the actual construction of the transmission line? 2 to 3 years, right. So there's opportunities there in the planning and the permitting process to really cut some time out, but someone's going to have to focus on it. Okay. So, and the EPA states that they believe that any of these reliability needs will be addressed through our normal processes. Well, we might be able to address them through normal processes, but we might need some accelerated processes as well. Okay, moving on to other reliability issues. We talked about the time to develop the reliability safety valve. And the utility industry very much appreciates having that reliability safety valve. It's not a total out. It means that if there's a plant that's needed to keep the lights on, it can continue to run, even if it does not have in hand the allowances or the recs that it needs, but it's going to have to go out and buy those, or the state is going to have to show some other place that you reduce those emissions. So that plant can run in order to keep the lights on, but you still need to meet the emissions targets. So, and they don't, the statement in the rule is, we see this being used very, very infrequently, only in cases of emergency. So again, it's really not a total out. So how can transmission help? We would like to see transmission be part of the overall solution, not just, okay, everybody figure out what they need to do and then afterwards we'll plan the transmission system. We believe at ATC that a robust transmission system can help you achieve some of these targets. But what do we need to look at specifically? Okay, if a generator retires, we may need to build transmission. We have looked at some possible retirements in our service territory, and some of them, it could be quite expensive to build transmission to meet the reliability standards if the plant retires and there's nothing else there. If a new generator is built, it needs to be interconnected to the system. Again, this is something that we do all the time, but it does take time. If a generator switches from coal to gas, we might need transmission, particularly if it's one of these small, older coal plants located sort of locally in urban settings, that they're not running all that much right now because they're mostly out of the money. But if you now are going to put a natural gas combined cycle plant there and run at 75%, you might need some transmission upgrades. If renewables are used to meet the standard, they can be local or regional. I mentioned that in regard to the MultiValue projects. You might want to source them outside the state into places, if it's wind, where the wind regime is much better. There are huge savings in what we call at ATC the renewable investment benefit. So for instance, if your wind regime, if your capacity factors of your wind machines in Minnesota and Iowa are 40%, and here in Wisconsin, they're only 30%, it means that you have to build, many, many more wind machines here in Wisconsin to produce the same amount of energy that you could from the machines in Minnesota or Iowa. We talked about reduced losses on the system. We do have the opportunity for those, if they're measurable and verifiable, to qualify to get RECs, and that's something that we could do for our customers. And again, just having a robust transmission system gives you that flexibility to source your power from different areas, whether it be renewable, solar, utility scale solar, or coal. So, not coal, excuse me. We're not coal or nuclear, wherever it is, wherever the cheapest power is. If you've got a more robust transmission system, you can, you can save money for your customers, and those savings go back to the ratepayers ultimately, either in savings for the utilities, or if our utilities have access to a better transmission system and they can get more sales in the marketplace that are outside of Wisconsin, the profit they make on those sales goes back to the ratepayers. It doesn't stay in their pocket. So ATC's position, we don't take any position on the merits of the Clean Power Plan. We are really an enabler. We do believe the potential impacts on reliability have to be considered, and I would add that they have to be considered in an appropriate time frame, because we don't want to build a whole bunch of short-term fixes on the transmission system and then be stuck with them when we could have a larger, more strategic, more cost-effective solution. But if we run out of time to build that, we'll have to take whatever we can get done in the time frame. Again, we're still aware of that timeline that we've talked about, and we believe that transmission expansion should be considered as part of the overall solution, not just at the end of the process. And we believe that all of the benefits should be included as you think about whether to build transmission or to do another option, such as generation or demand side. And we have learned how to monetize those benefits and evaluate that. As an approach, we're still, as I think everyone is, studying the final rule. We're actively participating in MISO's Clean Power Plan analysis that they've been working on, and we're available to serve as a resource as states develop their plans. Thank you.